let me also bring in Massachusetts, Rachel Maddow, the host of the Rachel Maddow Show on Air America Radio. And Rachel, is this, at least on some level, a serious issue about celebrity justice, or is that an excuse for stuffy news organizations to wallow in the great Paris cesspool?
I think that we're wallowing, but I think the most interesting thing about it is that we feel really guilty about wallowing. The conversation we're having right now is a conversation that's actually a pretty mainstream reaction to the Paris coverage. I think that we feel really guilty about how badly we want to cover celebrities, and so part of what's going on is that we're baying for blood, and we want a human sacrifice here. That's why people were so upset about her getting out of jail. We ought to draw and quarter her, or drop her from a plane without a parachute into Times Square or something, and get our collective cultural angst over about this.
It's funny, Blanquita Cullen, because when I was watching the breathless, relentless coverage on the cable networks Thursday and Friday, I didn't detect a whole lot of guilt.
No, but you know what Paris Hilton is? She's junk food. Okay, we're stressed out. You named all of the things that are going wrong with the world, okay? There's Iraq, there's the G8, we're all kind of like this. What can we watch? What can bring us some relief without making us really crazy that we feel good about is junk food. It's like reading the rags, you know? You can talk about Paris and you don't feel like you're doing really anything that's so serious against anybody, because you can slice her, you can dice her, you can say, yeah, I'm glad she's in the slammer, but she's not your family, she's not your country, she's not your world, she's junk food.
But even organizations that usually have a high-fiber diet, Matthew Felling, felt compelled to join here. For example, on Thursday, the New York Times gave, this is the day that Paris Hilton was suddenly taken out of jail for 3 days, one paragraph in the New York Times. Yes. The next day, front page story. Brian Williams, I mentioned, nothing on NBC Night News Thursday, near the top of the newscast on Friday. So, and Eugene Robinson of the Washington Post, a columnist who usually writes about important matters, writes that Paris Hilton's great talent is for celebrity. Paris wins, we're all watching. But we're all watching because we're all putting it on the air.
Yeah, exactly. And I wonder when we're going to get to the point, the tipping point, where we just think, you know what, enough is enough. And I would like to think that maybe this is the story where we finally just throw up our hands and say, you know what, we just made a whole lot of airtime out of nothing. And I think you were talking about how it was all over the place. And on Friday, we had a new media critic added to the ranks. Tommy Chong was invited by MSNBC.
Explain who he is.
Tommy Chong is a very famous for being high throughout most of the 70s.
Cheech and Chong.
Yes, exactly. Cheech and Chong. They brought him in on MSNBC. Contessa Brewer sat there and said, "Can you believe what's happening in Paris?" And Tommy Chong actually sat back and said, "Who died? Who embezzled money? Why are we talking about this?" And I thought, well, when Tommy Chong is the voice of reason, we are down a rabbit hole deep.
Did you see the article in yesterday's New York Post written by Andrea Pizer saying, "Sobbing slut finds star power useless"? And it basically says, for the first time in human history in the state of California, where Michael Jackson and O.J. Simpson run free and Britney Spears is permitted to breed, a useless celebutard was told a simple and completely unfamiliar word, no. So basically, the Superior Court Justice Michael Sauer has now turned into Paris Hilton's mother and has said the one word that no one has ever said to her, no, you go to jail.
I've never heard of celebutard myself.
Well, it's right here. Let me show it to you right here.
Rachel Maddow, you know, I'm not saying this is not a story. There's a lot of interest in Paris Hilton. She did get this jail term. She suddenly got out. There was a fight between the L.A. sheriff and the court system. But this is, after all, about a 45-day sentence for driving with a suspended license. And yet we all treated it like it was a constitutional crisis.
The outrage here is not about driving with a suspended license. The outrage is not about DUI. The outrage is not about the balance of power between the sheriff department and the Superior Court. The outrage here is about a celebrity getting their comeuppance. And I also think it is about how guilty we feel about how much time we spend covering them. We hate ourselves for the amount of celebrity coverage we all digest. But yet we keep doing it, and we just need to bay for a little blood every now and then to make ourselves feel better about what we do that we know is so bad for us.
And Rachel, I just wanted to say the other thing, it's also about whether she gets a body cavity search and they take off her hair extensions.
Now, you touched on this earlier, Blanquita, and we see this with Lindsay Lohan going into rehab and Britney and her antics and so forth. Is there something out there that we are trying to tap into where people love to hate this airhead heiress, as the New York Daily News called her? In other words, these days you can't hate any ethnic group, you can't hate just about anybody, but you can hate Paris Hilton.
You can hate a blonde white chick, okay? You can hate a blonde white chick who is really so self-absorbed and such a vacuous personality that we all can dislike her. We'll watch her fashion sense. We like to see what the girls are doing. We like to see her pose and say, it's hot. But we also want to see her get her comeuppance, because bottom line is Americans don't like people who are worthless. We like people that have a standard.
And this raises the question, Matthew Felling, as to what she's famous for in the first place. I mean, really, she was kind of a C-list celebrity until that homemade sex tape bounced around the internet.
Yeah, talk about body cavity search, huh? No, but no. I mean, she was famous sort of as a brand name. She was famous for having all this money inherited from daddy, granddaddy,
Leg
and all
up
these.
on the competition.
And it's hey, but it's family hour right now.
Somebody hose her down.
But at the end of the day, I mean, it's Paris Hilton. And by the way, did you know her show is premiering tonight? And I think that there's. I don't know. This is going to really work out well.
What are we going to hold a candle for her? We're going to hold a Paris vigil for her?
You know, the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifferent. And we are anything but indifferent to Paris Hilton. We are obsessed with her. And it's not just about not loving her. It's not just about thinking she's worthless. We get something out of hating her as a culture.
And lest we be accused of being unfair to Paris Hilton, let me read a statement that was put out while she's behind bars in Los Angeles. I was shocked, she says, to see all the attention devoted to the amount of time I would spend in jail for what I had done by the media, public, and city officials. I would hope going forward that the public and the media will focus on more important things like the men and women serving our country in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other places around the world.
Oh, they're enjoying this too. They're enjoying this too.
Number of people who think that was written by her handlers, raise your hand.
Oh yeah, all of us.
Right. Very good.
And the fact of the matter is, I mean, it's not enough that Paris to have the statement come out, but then she wanted to call in her appearance at the court. You know, she didn't even want to have to go in and really meet with the real people.
Oh,
she wanted to call in.
Who cares if she thought she could phone in or had to be there? We just want pictures of her. That's all we want. We're desperate to have Paris on TV.
Let's move on to something marginally more important. The story broke last weekend. Federal authorities making 4 arrests. Initially in the plot to blow up the fuel tanks at John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York. The New York Times did not put this story on page 1. Does O'Reilly have a point? Was that underplayed?
Well, I think, first of all, Paris Hilton made the front page of the New York Times yesterday, so you're showing the priorities of the New York Times. And I think reasonable people can disagree about the JFK plot, because I was talking with some of the correspondents at CBS this week, and they said, you know what, after you looked at the press conference, after you looked at the facts, you saw that these guys had no bankroll. The leader was in his 60s, and all of his attendants were in their 50s. It just didn't fit the normal profile we have of a serious threat. And when I see that clip from NBC saying unthinkable devastation, you know, if you just advance the story a little bit longer, you realize that there are some fail-safe switches, and you realize that this was a little bit blown out of proportion.
The New York Times ombudsman this morning says it was a very good story, but it should have been on the front page. The national editor of the Times, Suzanne Daly, says the plotters had yet to lay out plans. They had no financing, nor did they have any explosives. So let me turn it around, Rachel Maddow. Was this hyped by television? It wasn't anywhere near being able to be carried out.
I think that you saw an interesting divide in the coverage between news outlets that essentially parroted what the Justice Department said, which was the unthinkable devastation next 9/11 line. And then you saw news outlets that actually looked into the feasibility of whether or not this was a real-world threat with real-world implications, and those outlets played it down. I think that's actually the more responsible approach to have taken. It should also be noted that the New York Times didn't have a front page above the fold headline on it. They did have a small below the fold headline on the front page on the day that O'Reilly says they didn't.
Saying read the story on the Metro front. Go ahead.
Well,
That's exactly right.
The bottom line is it was good news, okay? It may not have had as much funding. They weren't as sophisticated, but the bottom line is it was good news for people who are concerned that terrorists are going to happen in this country and no one is watching. So the New York Times, I think, really should have had it on the front page.
All right. Last word, Blanquita Cullen, Matthew Felling, Rachel Maddow. Thanks very much for joining us this morning.